Today I'm excited to show you how to make this boxy bag. You're going to need 2 pieces of outer fabric, 2 pieces of lining fabric, and 2 pieces of batting that are 7 3/4 inches by 11.5 inches long. You'll need a zipper that is longer than that, and you are going to probably want to quilt your fabric. I used my embroidery machine. I always recommend pressing your fabric before cutting, and using a rotary cutter and mat makes the job much easier. Once you have all your fabric cut out, it's time to attach the zipper. So you'll want to lay it face down onto one of your outer pieces, and then take the lining fabric, one piece of it, and put it on top. And you're going to line up the edges of all 3, the outer, the lining, and the zipper, and clip those in place. Once you have them clipped, you are ready to sew your first seam. When sewing next to the zipper, you can either use a zipper foot or a very narrow foot. I used a narrow foot to sew mine. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end, and you'll see when you open it up, you will have your zipper sandwiched between one of your outer pieces and your lining. Next, you are going to lay your second outer piece that's been quilted on top of the zipper, and then clip it just a little bit so that you can not have it move. And then you're going to flip it over, and you're going to add your second lining piece on top of your first lining piece. And you're going to clip those in place, making sure that everything is even at the top. And you can see here just how I did that. Hopefully this isn't too confusing. In the first step, you used one edge of the zipper, and then in this step, you're using the second edge. So you can see how the 2 outer pieces are together and the 2 lining pieces are together. Now you're going to sew this second seam just like you did the first seam, close to the zipper, and this ends up being about 1/4 inch from the edge of the fabric if you need a measurement to go by. Now that the zipper is sandwiched between all the layers of fabric, it's time to open it up so that the 2 lining pieces are facing one way with the zipper in the middle, and the outer pieces are facing up the other way. And you want to give it a quick press so that the zipper is lying flat so that you can do the top stitching. It's time to go back to the sewing machine and do some top stitching along either side of the zipper, about 1/8 of an inch, maximum of 1/4 of an inch on the outer fabric. And you're going to do this on both sides, just like you see here. Now we need to do something that I forgot to tell you earlier. Sorry about that. We need a piece of fabric that is 6 inches by 2.5 inches. You're going to press it so that it's folded in half, and then you're going to take each raw edge and fold it into the center, lining it up with that folded crease. And you're going to press those, then you're going to fold everything in half again and press until you have a strip that you're going to take to the sewing machine, and you are going to run a line of top stitching on either side of it to make your zipper pull tabs. Once you have sewn it, you are now going to cut it in half, and you will have 2 of these zipper pull tabs. Next, you need to open the zipper. I don't do it quite halfway, but halfway is fine. And then you're going to cut off the excess zipper on each side. It's very important that you open the zipper before you do this, otherwise it's going to be pretty tricky. Next, you're going to fold your zipper pull tabs and lay them raw edges even with the raw edge of the fabric on top of the zipper on either side, and clip it in place so that you can then do some stitching to keep it in place. I recommend stitching it instead of just keeping it clipped, because it will be much easier. This is what your bag should look like at this point. You can see those little zipper tabs or whatever they're called. I don't really know where they are. And now you're going to fold the outer fabric to be right sides together, and the lining fabric so it's right sides together. You're going to clip the outer fabric together and the lining fabric together, but you need to leave about a 4-inch gap on the lining fabric so that you can turn the bag right side out later. Now you're going to take your bag to your machine, and you're going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you are going to sew the outer fabric together along that edge you clipped, and you're going to backstitch at the front and the back. Then you're going to do the same with the lining. However, you're going to stop and leave that 4-inch gap for turning. Be sure to backstitch, especially in that 4-inch opening, at the beginning and end of each of those stitches to make sure that that's sturdy. And you can see here there's the opening that you will use for turning. Now it's time to sew the short sides together. So you're going to fold the outer fabric so that the seam line is even with the zipper, and you are going to clip the short edges together, and you're going to have just that little bit of lining attached. Most of the lining is going to be out of the way. You're just going to clip it right there in the center. And then you are going to do the same thing on the other side, just lining up that seam line with the center of the zipper. Next, you're going to do the same thing with the lining. You're going to flip it over, center it so that the seam line of the lining fabric is even with the zipper, and clip it into place. You will do that for both sides of the lining, just in the center. Keep the lining and the outer fabrics separate and independently clip each edge of both of those. Then you're going to measure 2 inches from the outside edge onto each of the pieces of the lining and the outer fabric, so you'll have 8 total markings. Next, head back to the sewing machine and sew 1/4 inch seam allowance from each of those 2-inch markings to the outer edge of the fabric on each of the outside piece fabrics and the lining fabrics. So you should have a total of 8 times you've stitched, and now we're going to sew in between the markings. We're going to put the lining and the outer fabric together on each end and sew in between the lines of stitching through all the layers so that we only have that middle section together. This is what your bag should look like once you've got all those seams sewn. Next, lay the bag flat and measure 1.5 inches from the bottom and from the side on each of the 4 corners. Cut along each of those lines so that you have a square cut out from each corner. On the outer fabric only, you are going to take the corners that you cut and you are going to fold them together. So as you can see here, you're lining them up and you're going to clip them in place, and you're going to do that on every outer corner, and we're ignoring the lining for now. Do this for all 4 corners, match them up, and then this is what you should have when you are finished. Next, stitch each of those seams using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, backstitching at the beginning and end, just like this. Then you will do the same thing we just did, only this time with the lining. However, instead of keeping it separate, you're going to now clip it to the seams you just stitched of the outer fabric. You're going to clip the lining fabric to that and sew another 1/4 inch seam allowance on each corner. Since the lining is a little trickier, you may just want to do 2 ends at a time. Then you're going to sew another 1/4 inch seam allowance on each side like before, and this is what you should have when you're done. So remember, we have that opening that we left in the lining, and we're going to use it to turn our bag through the lining. Once you get the lining pushed through the bag, smooth it out, and then you're going to pin the opening closed, and then you will use a maybe 1/8 of an inch at the most seam allowance to sew that opening closed. You can also do it by hand if you prefer. Now flip the bag right side out, pushing all those corners so that you have a nice crisp looking bag. And that's it. You've done it. If you made it this far, awesome. Please let me know if you make one of these bags. I would love to hear what you think of this tutorial. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Happy sewing!